Здрасте, люди добрые, меня зовут Seva Kaplan. Сегодня 5 июля 2022 года. Сегодня совершилась на редкость неординарная вещь. Вышла в свет книга, которая называется, вот она у вас перед глазами, реальная книга, а не только картинка. The Last Boss of Brighton, Борис, Биба, Найфельд and the Rise of the Russian Mob in America, что в переводе на русский означает «Последний босс Брайтона», Борис Найфельд, кличка Биба и появление и рост российской преступности в Америке. Автор ее, как вы видите внизу, белым по черному Douglas Century. И Douglas Century сейчас у вас на экранах. Мы сделаем с ним интервью по поводу этой книги. Но перед этим я хочу сразу упредить всех, что Douglas не говорит по-русски, хотя, может быть, бы и мог. Но у вас есть возможность, когда вы увидите это видео в записи, поэтому мы его делаем в записи, нажать кнопочку Settings, настройки, потом перейти в Language, язык, Subtitles, титры, выбрать язык перевода. И если у вас не получится с моего объяснения, вы всегда найдете в любом браузере объяснение, как это сделать. Все это очень просто. Okay, Doug, first of all, I have to ask for your forgiveness because the first version of our interview came in as a surprise to you. Your video was not in the final version, and I had a reason for that. I just decided not to tell you because the first version is going on air for the radio listeners only. They would not even
Oh, gotcha.
see me, not you, no, nobody. They're interested in the contents of our conversation, and there were some questions you answered in a very unusual way, and I value greatly your openness, which comes from from your natural passion for this particular product, for this book,
Mm.
which is coming out now. So my first question for you, as uh, the author, is about art of sales in general, art of sales in modern time. Um, how did it reflect on your work? If you understand what I
Well,
mean by art of sales, of course.
first, David, thank you for having me on again. The art of sales, you mean how one markets and promotes a book, a product like this,
No, not
versus how?
exactly. How was
Okay.
the timing for release chosen? Uh,
Oh, okay.
did you experience any pressure from the publisher? How did you use the buzzwords like Russian, Jewish, whatsoever, which attracts additional audience?
Sure. Well, in my experience, publishers want the creative input of an author. They wanted it for July. I think there's a sense that some of there's a summer season for reading. There's usually two big seasons where you want a book about war heroes might come out in time for Father's Day in America, or certain books are more Christmas related in wintertime. I think they thought this would be a summer release, so they planned that. The word Russian mob, I was really on the fence about using Russian because Boris Nejfeld is not Russian. He speaks Russian. He was born in Belarusia, right, in the Belarusian Republic. What I found in researching this, and I think you were very kind in saying I did a deep dive, the most proper way to refer to this group is a Soviet emigre crime. Many were from Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, and not. So I had to say in my introduction, this is culturally Russian or Russian speaking. But the publisher wanted Russian mob, and I didn't have a problem with that because that's how people refer to things. I mean, you don't
Well,
want to read the Soviet emigre Jewish, that's not a good subtitle.
yeah,
Um,
but it's a normal simplification of term for the United States of America. Whoever you are by nationality, if you speak Russian, you're a product of Russian culture or its absence. And that's
yes.
why they call us all Russians. I don't mind.
It's an interesting thing. I didn't stop to think of why people. First of all, Russian mafia. I think you and I had this conversation. Russian mafia is a great buzzword, but it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as the Russian mafia in the sense of the Cosa Nostra mafia. There is a Russian organized crime, Russian speaking organized crime groups that are very fluid and amoeba-like, but to put that in a subtitle is not. It's
But
not. You need to simplify things, and as you say, there's
I
buzzwords.
agree. I agree with you. But Doug, I don't agree with you because the Russian mafia in America exists. It's all of us in general because all people who were brought up in the Soviet culture, in the broad term of this word, were always ready to steal from the system. So
True.
they belong to a criminal group, which can be counted in hundreds of thousands of people. And this kind of a mentality cannot be changed by a degree. Oh, the Soviet Union does not exist anymore, and everybody who was born after 1991 is a different person. No, they inherit the mentality from the previous generations, and so on and so forth. And when they end up in a closed society in the United States of America, where they prefer to speak Russian only, that kind of counter Russia, counter culture grows up, and we see seeds of the job in our in those who inherit it, our children, our grandchildren, who in case they don't speak English. I know some who were born here and their English sucks big time because they don't need to. They prosper within the diaspora.
Well,
But
you can say that it's an entire you're in group and out group. I'm not a member of the Soviet emigre Jewish group. But one thing I did learn, very interesting information for me, was that everybody heard about black market and making money on the left, na level, right? But when Boris would tell me, Boris Nejfeld had to leave because he felt the pressure. He said the pinchers closing in of uh, the crime of theft from the state in an excessive amount was 10,000 rubles, which was the supreme measure of punishment. And then I saw, because I had a very good translator, yeah, it was on the books, right? Stealing from the state was kind of the highest level you could get to in your era. And many people brought that mentality, saying it's fine to steal from the state because communism was this repressive regime. And they applied that mentality to the American state, meaning let's cheat Medicare, let's cheat the IRS, let's cheat various things.
absolutely.
So, I think one of the things that I learned is that crime was endemic and systemic in the Soviet Union, and maybe many people brought that mentality to a country where it wasn't necessary. But I'm not gonna pass judgment because I didn't grow up like you did and many other people in that world, that highly pressurized world.
Okay, how would you describe Boris Nejfeld, nicknamed Biba, to those of us who don't understand who your main character is?
Well, I would say he's a very complex anti-hero. I don't know if that word exists in Russian, but
It does. It
it
does.
does. Yeah, he's not a hero. He's an anti-hero who is in the same way that we talked about some of these sociopathic personalities like Tony Soprano. Many gangster books or gangster stories revolve around an anti-hero. He's a notorious mob boss. Notorious in the sense of he was very feared. I think probably among some people he still is. He was born right after the Great Patriotic War, 1947, when his father Mikhail was in a gulag for speculation. You called it, right? It was called the
Mm-hmm.
black market. So he didn't really know his father. His mother basically got tired of waiting for Mikhail to come out of the gulag, and she just left and married another man. So Boris was raised by his grandparents. I think his home was kind of stable. This was in a backwater, kind of Gomel in Belarus. So he wasn't like you from Moscow or Leningrad, these big cities. And very quickly, once his grandfather, who was the glue of the family, who was a cutter in a factory, once his grandfather Yosef died, then Boris was running wild. He ended up in an internat in a boarding school because his grandmother was sickly, couldn't take care of him, etc. And then he became a hooligan. Went to prison at 18, went to a zona, a work camp from 18 to 21. And from that point on, he said, I only wanted to become a professional criminal, a blatnoy, right? That was his ambition in life. And he went out to Siberia, bilking the state, theft from the state. They had to, what is the phrase in Russian? You tell me, I can't pronounce it. Dead souls, the name of the,
Мертвые души.
thing.
There is a
Yeah, that
novel
was a
by
big,
Gogol which is titled "Мертвые души," the dead
and
souls, right?
that was the best scam that criminals had in the 70s, 60s, and 70s, because you could pretend that you had 40 workers and maybe you had 18, and the boss of the crew, like Boris, could then collect cash because everything was cash for all these dead souls. So he was stealing from the state. Anyway, came to America and rose up under a very famous former Vodizakone named Yves Seagron, the original criminal leader. They call him the Godfather, but nobody in Russian actually used that word. And Boris was his right hand man. Yves was murdered in 1985, and Boris was always in the right place at the right time. It's very interesting. He profited from the fall of communism with some partners in East Germany and in Antwerp. They were stealing diamonds. He went to Sierra Leone. He was a heroin trafficker. So at this point, he's a 74-year-old pensioner who was convicted of
No,
racketeering,
these guys
money
never
laundering.
retire.
Well, officially. So he's a thrice convicted. I think he's a conviction in the Soviet times for hooliganism, and then in the United States he's convicted as a drug trafficker, as a heroin trafficker, racketeering, money laundering, and then even in his old age, as you well remember a few years ago, an attempted murder for hire that turned into an extortion. And he's done his time for all these things, and he's kind of unrepentant. I mean, he says he would live his life the same way. So he's a very complex, but complexity for me as an author makes for interesting characters. Sorry,
You,
I don't know if that wasn't a good summary of his life. That was a little more detailed than I had planned to give you, but
I'm
that's him in a nutshell.
yeah, I'm happy you didn't go into the details. Otherwise, you, Doug, would deprive our viewers from the pleasure of reading the book. So it's what we do now is just an appetizer.
Sure.
Tell me if you experience any, there's a psychological term, any kind of a connect between Boris Neifeld's family and yours.
Sure. Well, my family came from one grandparent from Warsaw, but the other three of my grandparents came from Bialystok. And I write in the introduction of the book that the connection I felt was that we all came from that era, the same region called in the era of the Pale of Settlement before the revolution. It was called White Russia, right? The Grodno Governorate. So my
Belarus.
family and his, yeah, exactly. They actually came from the same region. So my grandparents got out. They got out before the First World War, and the Nayfelds stayed behind, and they, like most people who they were, Belarus was overrun. So I think his grandparents went to Kazakhstan, and I felt like, well, that could have been us. Like we could have been, our family could have been left behind in the Soviet times, and who knows what we would have done to survive. So yeah, I felt a connection. I felt not necessarily sympathy for what he went through, but some understanding that it wasn't easy to be a poor Jewish kid in 1947, 48, 49, without a father, without a mother. And Boris's main word he always says is survive. I must survive. I had to survive. So yeah, sure, familial connections. The first time we met, his English is horrible, and obviously I don't speak much Russian, but I learned Yiddish as a kid, and he speaks some Yiddish. So a lot of our conversation was little bits of Yiddish. So I like that.
Actually, he told me that he hated everything English, especially his life in America. But when he was put to prison, and that happened a lot, he would read all the books and his language would improve because of the prison system in the United States.
Absolutely. And one of the things that really fascinated me was books, because I said to him when I met him, I said, "My, Odessa was so famous. I read this is a formative book for me, the
Babel.
Odessa stories of
Hmm.
Babel. Yeah, the
Одесский
complete works.
рассказ.
Everybody, I don't know, but Benya Crick is a gangster, and he's from Odessa, and he's a larger than life character. He's based on, of course, Michka Yaponchik, this real life Jewish protector of the ghetto, but also an extortionist. And I said Babel, and Boris immediately said, "Of course, we all had to read Red Horseman, which in English is called Red Cavalry." But another thing that when he was locked up, he read everybody. He was telling me about reading Tolstoy, and he said the book that really changed him was this one, Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment. He read all of Dostoevsky. So, as a writer, I was fascinated. He didn't read much before he went to prison, but in prison, yes. And also, his English is based on prison English, so a lot of the words are very rough and coarse. So his English is, but in Russian, he's a chameleon. He can be very erudite, and he can also talk like a gangster. He can put on various voices. I think he would have made a good actor, actually.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was in the show production with him for 8 years. That's how we made acquaintance with each other, actually. And I saw him being very charming and very dangerous. At some point, when we had a table read and we were sitting at the table, there were like a dozen of us. And he was reading his text, addressing a woman in front of him. And she got so scared, it
Wow.
showed. He
Yeah.
did the, there was no effort. He was, natural. That's his nature,
Oh,
actually.
absolutely. Yeah.
Being dangerous and charming at the same time. I think that his ability to smile while producing this menace is a trademark for Boris Neifeld,
Yeah.
not anybody else. By the way, were you kind of scared to disclose in print your discoveries about his personality, which we now discuss?
No, I don't think I'm not. I wasn't scared. I actually think it's fascinating to peel back the layers because no person. I don't believe in this duality of good and evil. Yes, many of the things Boris did in his life were bad, but he's so self-effacing and so honest, at least about his own character. He would say, "Doug, I'm not a good guy. I was not a good husband. I was not faithful. I was not a good father. This is me. I am this guy. I am who I am."
Yeah, it comes with a
Um,
job.
yeah, it comes with his job. So there were things that really surprised me about him. It surprised me how funny he could be. Like you say, there's a charm and but right underneath the surface, he can speak so matter of factly about. Well, I was going to Warsaw because I had to buy. I didn't put this in the book. I was going to Warsaw because I had a deal to buy five pieces of munitions that could be used in an assassination against five people. There was another. He just like almost like saying I had to go to the grocery store. He was talking about a hit that he was contracted to do, so matter of factly without any. It's just part of his business. But by the same token, I found him to be um, witty, very witty, and sometimes unintentionally humorous. Like some things he would say are. I'll leave it, like you said, for the reader to read in the book. There are sections of this book I think that are so hilarious because uh, his way with words and the way he describes things. Um, but the charm comes with the menace, and you're right, it's a very unique and interesting thing to see how scary he can be, and at the same time, how charming and manipulative. I would actually say manipulative is another trait.
Yeah, at some point, while listening to you, I remember one of his schemes when he would transport heroin in the TV tubes through Poland because Poland was on the radar for the FBI in the black market. So instead of going from Shanghai, for instance, directly to the United States, they transported it to Warsaw, then packaged it into the TV tubes, and so on and so forth. He's
Very
very
ingenious.
He's very open to any kind of improvisation. By the way, when he was offered to be a head of a prostitution ring in New York, it was only because those women were so scared of the other guys who wanted to get some part of their incomes. So they went to Biba and asked him for protection. Could it
Of
be
course.
a breach of law? Depends on whether you're what you do for a living.
Yeah,
Um,
the women that are called mamkas, right?
Mamka, yeah.
Yeah, and there was a period. It's written about in the book very very that these women were getting robbed. The houses of prostitution were getting robbed, and yeah, there was particularly one boxer who was coming around and having sex with the women and then stealing money and then beating them up. And so they came to Boris for the roof for the krisha. Boris's bread and butter has always been the krisha, right? And this is you and I have talked about this before. Krisha
Hmm.
exists. It existed in the
Protection.
90s and it still exists now in the former Soviet Union. So yeah, he was protecting the women. So in that sense, yes, he was involved in an ugly business, but his angle on it was in some sense I was keeping these women safe.
At some point in my life, I interviewed a very confidential source who would not like to be disclosed in the open. He told me that absolutely everyone who is Russian in any way, who has a business, has a Krisha. Even Putin himself, because besides being the president of the country, has multiple businesses under disguises, probably. But anyway, all of these businesses have a protection. And
Yeah.
it does not humiliate the president of Russia, but it shows the way business works out there. Uh,
That's just jaw-dropping information for the average person. I have to repeat that that even the president of Russia, in his legitimate, maybe they're cloaked, has an organized crime figure, because I describe it very carefully in the book, in the wild 90s, as you guys called it. Boris actually partnered with a very famous vor named Ivankov. You know, if people remember, he was assassinated. Another Yaponchik, not the original Yaponchik, but little Japanese, right? Boris and he were providing Krisha for Jewish emigres who wanted to come back and make some money legitimately, but they were going to get extorted, and they were getting extorted. And Boris said, I would say it was impossible in the 90s to go back and try to do any business, a TV show, a sports team, and without some organized crime group asking you for 20 to 30%. So organized crime would come to groups and say, you need protection from those people, so you need people like us to protect you because we know them. We'll be able to work it out on the criminal level, right?
Yeah, nobody goes to prison.
Yeah,
By the way,
exactly.
you dealt for a long time with a person who could be described as a pattern, a social pattern of who the Russian American diaspora consists of. He's the
Yeah.
oldest generation because we, with the Soviet emigres, started coming to America in the 1970s, and many of them, especially those ones who never went into mainstream, they preserved their culture, their mentality, and their eagerness to be protected. They're surrounded within this Russian language fortress. So your impression of the entire Russian American diaspora could be very, very far from true because they want to produce an impression that everybody is like them. But my children, they speak Russian as well, but they are not Russian Americans in the criminal sense of this word.
Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
anyway, what is your personal impression of the Russian American diaspora in terms that some of them could be Vladimir Putin's Trojan horses among us?
By the way, I think I got a window into a kind of language that Boris uses that probably was of your generation and is dying out. Like he would say these very clever things. He would say, you know, making money on the left. He said every one of the old emigres who came with me who experienced repression would make money on the left. And he said we would do things not in the way that was taught to us by the great Lenin. And my translator, who grew up in the Soviet time, said, "Oh, this is a very famous phrase. You know, study, study, and more study." So people probably don't say that anymore, but everybody knows these expressions. You know, Blat is even higher than Stalin,
Lobbying.
and yeah,
It's synonymous.
there are things that Boris said, and also one of the things I loved about having a really good translator, I have to give him a lot of credit, is Boris would say, you know, a very famous mafia guy, killed a guy that owed Boris money, and Boris said, "Well, the Moor has done his duty, the Moor can go." And I said, "That's what he said?" Well, and my translator said, "Sure, it's a famous expression in Russian, you know, referring to like Othello." It's actually Russian language, at least of Boris's generation and your generation, is so rife with fascinating linguistic, literary qualities. My impression of the Russian emigre community is, at first, I would say I knew them in the 70s. They struck me when I first encountered them in school, just more rough and rude. We'd play soccer and you'd always have an argument, or they saw nothing wrong with your spitting on the floor of the steam room. And you'd say, I told Boris that, and he said, "Of course, you know, this is like this different culture." But I find that most Soviet emigre Jews or Russian immigrants seem to be supporters of Putin's actions now. Maybe that's because I think you said to me, because many of them love Trump and because Trump allied himself with Putin. The Trojan horse thing, you know, you see almost like a fifth column for Putin. You know, I would say it's possible, but the ones I've met, I think, are so happy to be the ones I know. As much as they may still have Russian ethos and culture, seem so happy with America, you know, and so happy with, or Canada in another case, or Israel, that I would, in my estimation, I would not think that they would be saboteurs or fifth columnists for Putin. But you may know some. I don't know. In my experience, I didn't get that sense. No.
No, in my impression, because I deal with them on a daily basis while doing my radio, TV, and internet show, they can be compared to the Mowgli's. You remember the Mowgli's story about cobra when he wants to approach some treasures, and this white cobra who's guarding the treasures doesn't want to let him come
Mm,
into possession, and he grabs the cobra by the neck, looks into the mouth, and says, "Oh, you outlived your venom. You are not dangerous anymore."
wow,
This
wow.
is what's
That's,
happening to those of us, the Russian American diaspora, we are talking about now. They outlive their venom. It's only theoretical. They are not dangerous. Plus, their children, their grandchildren understand that their predecessors are victims of upbringing. The very way uh, your camera is off now for some reason.
I'm sorry because somebody's calling me. Okay.
Okay,
Is it better? I'm sorry.
okay. Now we're
Sorry.
back. Now we're back.
I
So
should have had do not disturb. I'm sorry for that.
yeah. So they're all antisocial, and it's a norm which their children don't abide to. So let them be the way they are. Let them live and die, like in the
Sure.
Paul McCartney's song. Uh, two very important the topics I would like you to touch on. One of them is that I was really afraid. I liked the beginning of your book, and the more I read, the more I got kind of scared that you would be glorifying the image of the guy who you like
Mm,
till the end of the story. And then it would not be correct. It's not a novel, but it's closer to documentary. But anyway, your positive attitude towards Boris Neifeld is obvious. So you continue on the news trend, which began with The Sopranos, then went through Breaking Bad, and later House of Cards, glorification of antisocial behavior. Uh, it can finally, ultimately lead to the destruction of the modern society. Don't you think so?
well, yeah, the antisocial nature of, or the sociopathic nature, as we talked about before, of so much of our pop culture, whether it's The Sopranos or The Goodfellas, all the gangster movies. Um, I feel very clearly that I have an ambivalent feeling towards Boris. I I tried to get the reader to understand him, not sympathize with him. I wanted to make him comprehensible because I realized at some point his behaviors were at sometimes so abhorrent, so antisocial that uh, but a lot of times if when you read my book, if he says something and I don't trust his version, I will say so. When he said to me, I
True.
faked being a psych I faked he said I put on all the symptoms of psychopathy in order to get Article B, which was the way you got out of the Soviet army. I put on all the I read up on how to pretend to be a psychopath. And I said, well, okay, it's also possible that the army doctor just said this guy's a psychopath. And then the punchline of that was, we can't let a guy like you carry a gun. And I thought, okay, that's ironic because in America he did nothing but carry a 38 caliber. But also by the end of the book, he makes a lot of rationalizations that he had no choices. And I think if you read my book carefully, you don't want me to give it away. I I undercut a lot of them, and I said, but didn't you have choices? You say you came to America with your plans to be a legitimate businessman with your black market money. You could have had a taxi, but yes, you also said right away when you got here you started stealing from supermarkets. So in many ways, I think it's not my job to judge. And it's as a writer of nonfiction, I think I would like my readers to be intelligent and perceptive enough to read between the lines. Decide in your estimation, is this guy a horrible human being? Was he a product of his environment? Is survival the only choice he had? And at the end of the day, I mean, is Raskolnikov in this classic novel? Is he not an antisocial straight? Why does he murders for no reason at all? And yet, Dostoevsky had to add an epilogue in which he gets punished because at first he wasn't even going to have him punished. Um, it's a fascinating thing. What makes a criminal? And I think we are all in some way envious of maybe not a street thug who just mugs women on the street. That's horrible. But of people who would steal millions from the state and not pay taxes, like Michael Francesi and Boris. These guys were stealing tens of millions weekly in gasoline tax. And you just imagine, well, I would like some Russian guys to come up at my house with shopping bags of cash that I could pay my daughter's tuition. And I mean, everybody has that strange fantasy, but none of us want to do it because nobody wants to go to prison. I think there's a dark wish fulfillment in many people of these guys do things I wish I could do. But
Uh,
anyway, I reserve judgment at the end of the book. If anybody reads my book all the way through and says, "Oh, Douglas was very, very overly kind to him. Century was overly kind to him," I'll take that criticism. But I also think I gave a lot of dark sides and also very, very, very clear prosecutors' allegations against him. Police. I tried to balance his version with many outside sources, and I let the reader then come to their own conclusions.
I used to know the guy who created the scheme of the gasoline business, Murat Balagula. I met him shortly before he passed away, and he was very, very sad about his fate because there were times when he would make $250,000 a day without doing nothing because everything had been created before. And then ultimately he fell victim of some miserable credit card scheme which gave him 8 years in prison. And after he was out, he was old, sick, and poor.
Yep.
So this is not a happy ending. This is not American
But
way.
by the way, Boris was the Krisha. Boris was partners with Marat in
Yes,
this
exactly.
scheme you're talking about, and it's very famous. Marat loved to gamble, and they would say, Marat would think nothing of losing 200,000 in Atlantic City because all he had to do was raise the price 1 cent on all the different stations or 2 cents, and
Yeah.
within a week he'd have all that money back. The gasoline business was so lucrative. But yes, Boris does not have a happy ending. Marat did not have a happy ending. Yves Agron, I don't think there are any happy endings in the gangster life unless you reform yourself and try to make a different life for yourself. It's either prison, death, or you come out a broken man who is without money and without respect, without fear. This, in the case of Marat, he was very depressed. I know. I met his daughter. My father was
Yeah,
broken once he came
Oksana,
out of
yeah,
prison.
right. Hopefully, your book, Doug, is the beginning of the happy ending for Boris. Who knows?
Well, I think that he's a very self-aggrandizing person, and he's a very interesting guy that way. And I think that's on some level. I mean, you said to me when you read my book at the beginning, you said, there's a lot of people who don't like him, and then I said, yeah, of course, this guy must have so many enemies, so many people who he hurt because he was going and you know collecting money and providing protection. There's many people from your era who probably do not have anything nice to say about Boris Найфельд, but I think it could be hopefully the start of him maybe speaking out or telling people about this life. As long as he always says, "I have no regrets," but he has tattooed across his stomach in Hebrew, "God forgive me." And I said, "Well, if you have no regrets, why did you get God, Hashem, forgive me?" And he said, "I have to. I have so many sins." He
It's
said, "I have
funny.
so many sins."
Yeah, it's
So,
funny. He wanted for the Lord to forgive him when he enters the what? The gates of paradise?
I mean, on some level, he's so contradictory, And I always say these things, like read the book. He says, "I never loved my mother," but his biological mother who abandoned him. He called his grandmother Baba Riva his real mother. But then at some point, he it's very important in Russian culture, right, to take care of your parents' grave, right?
Yep.
At some point, this woman he says, "I never loved. I'm only grateful that she didn't have an abortion." Well, he went over to help with the funeral and stuff. So, you know, I had a few women friends read it and said, on some level, he must have loved her. You take this is why I liked giving the reader his words unfiltered for long passages, because I feel like you can read between the lines and say, are these words a defense mechanism? Are these words bravado? Because um, well, again, he's a very complex person, and I would like to see that he lives out his life. He prefers being in Russia now because he can speak the language and enjoy. But I hope he lives out the rest of his life in good health, because I do think he can be a very generous man. He's very good to his niece and other people in his family. You have a friendship with him of sorts. You're friendly with him even after a very horrible thing where he was trying to kill you for business reasons.
Yeah, it was
But
just business, nothing personal. Yeah,
it wasn't personal.
on his
So
behalf.
when you let those bygones be bygones, right? You realize. I think at this point Boris just wants to live out his life and not get into trouble anymore. Hopefully it will be a happier ending than for most from this life.
Um, Doug, I'm very thankful to you for this book. It's a tremendous job. And I'm saying this not because I like you in general and we're talking now, it's not a matter of politesse. I understand the workload you had to put on your shoulders. And it's really tremendous because you're a psychologist in a way, because I read the book and I know Boris. And the way you describe his life is so close to the real thing. It's like a reality show put in print.
Yeah,
So
I tried. I tried.
yeah,
Oh, I
yeah.
just want to say I tried very hard to be faithful to the language that he uses,
Hmm.
Fenya and
It
Yiddish
shows.
expressions, and I mean, this was just a fun word. I'm most proud of the authenticity of the translation I used because it's very hard. The translator. It's Dovlatov is a great writer that you knew. Uh, I was reading the translator of this book. Benya Krieg at one point says, "Let's not smear kasha." And he said this is a very unique Odessa thing to say, and
Right.
um, it doesn't translate in English. Boris had many expressions, and I tried very hard to capture them linguistically, but also, as you said, psychologically. I don't think I'm a psychologist, but I think I tried very hard to paint an accurate portrait of the way his mind works, because I didn't want to whitewash anything, and I didn't want to glorify him. I really think at the end of the book, I hope people see it's a very sad life. It's a life without much. It's a lonely life. It's a life without much. He said, "In my life, there's been not much joy. Very moments of joy, in spite of all the money and the women and this quote unquote power." So at the end, if a man has lived his entire life and says there hasn't been much joy, you know, you have to wonder, was it worth it, right?
In a way, yeah. Uh, I would like to introduce something into a sequel to this book for you, Doug, if you ever go into it. It's a real story. At one point, when Boris was in an American prison, I don't remember what state it was in, uh, a, new,
Colorado. Yeah.
a newcomer enters the cell and asks in the perfect accentless English, "Are there any Russians in here?" Turns out he was looking for protection. And the guy who
Uh-huh.
was looking for protection, uh, I can disclose his name. There's no secret about it. It's David Morrow, a son of Tony Mora, one of the
Oh,
directors of Citicorp, who was given
wow.
10-year term for swindling while being the president of his own company. And I used to be a part of that company. He gave me the job at some point.
Wow.
So he
Wow.
had some connection with others who wanted me to be murdered by Boris Neifeld, nicknamed Biba.
Biba.
See, and that guy I'm talking about, he spoke Russian much better than many of the Russians living in the Brighton Beach area speak English. So this is a story which continues on while the guy who actually ordered me is not with us anymore, so we can put it on in paper. You can put it in paper.
It's an amazing story that in the 90s to early 2000s, many business disputes within the Russian or the Soviet emigre community, it was routine to settle them with.
Yeah,
When Boris first came to America, it was
never
they had
ended
to
up
go,
in
go
court.
through a Molotov cocktail through this guy's window so that
Yeah.
he would pay crucial to you say. And then in your time, it became, well, it's more difficult to take him to court. Let's just order a hit. So yeah, that's a fascinating. I mean, you and Boris could be a reality show by yourselves because just to imagine that you went from that to you were all having coffee in that lovely coffee shop a couple months ago and just
Yeah,
chatting about
it
stuff.
was fun. It was fun.
Most people would not believe that what you said happened, but the fact that both of you, this is a very important thing for people to know. I always try to verify, always try to confirm a story. So the fact that he has that story and you have the same story, it's very hard for two people to make up such a story and all the details be exactly the same. So that tells me immediately it's true. It's stranger than fiction.
Yeah, Douglas Sencher, thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your book, and hopefully it's not the last chance for me to interview you.
It won't be. Hopefully, we'll follow up further. Last Boss of Brighton. Thank you for promoting it. Thank you, and I think we'll have a giveaway perhaps on your show with some
Yeah,
trivia.
we will.
Uh, I hope that the very, very important thing, last thing I want to say is I don't know how many Russian language speakers will read the book, but it was very important to me that somebody who actually knew Brighton Beach, like yourself, would read the book and say, you got it right. Maybe a couple things I got wrong, but I wanted it to be read by people who knew this world and take it as at least the unvarnished reality that was not just this man's life, but his entire generation that came to America in the 70s and hustled and survived and often broke the law. So thank you for reading it, and thank you so much for your support.
My pleasure, Doug.